Jessica Morgan adjusted the collar of her blazer, her fingers tightening around the edge of her notebook as she walked into the glass-walled conference room of Sterling and Whitman Advertising. She had spent the last 6 months leading the biggest campaign of her career, a nationwide launch for one of the firm's most high-profile clients. The numbers were staggering, a 42% increase in engagement, millions in revenue, and the kind of industry recognition that put Sterling and Whitman on the map in ways they hadn't seen in years. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Inside, the executive team sat at the long, polished table. Richard Whitman, the CEO, lounged at the head, swirling the coffee in his expensive-looking mug. To his right was David Carter, the head of strategy, and a few senior executives, all men. Jessica took her seat, smoothing out the pages of her report. "Gentlemen, let's talk results." She delivered her presentation with precision, her voice steady, her facts airtight. Graphs showed explosive growth, metrics highlighted record-breaking performance. Every number, every chart, proved one thing: Jessica had led the campaign that made them all richer. When she finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, Richard chuckled, setting down his mug. "Impressive work, Jessica. Really, outstanding." She felt the warmth of pride rising in her chest. This was it. "Which is why," she began, "I'd like to discuss my compensation. Based on performance, I believe a raise is more than fair." Silence. Then Richard leaned forward, lacing his fingers together, and gave her the kind of condescending smile she had come to despise. "Jessica, women should be grateful for what they have." The words landed like a slap. She blinked, convinced for a moment that she had misheard him. The air in the room shifted, no one spoke. A few executives exchanged glances, but no one objected. "Excuse me?" Richard exhaled, as if this conversation was a tedious formality. "You do good work. But you're already well compensated. You should be happy with that." Jessica felt her heart hammering in her chest, a slow burn of humiliation creeping up her spine. She had spent years working harder, staying later, delivering more, only to be told she should be grateful for the bare minimum. "David just got a raise," she countered, her voice sharp but controlled. "He managed a campaign that performed 30% below projections. Yet you rewarded him." Richard laughed. "Well, David has a family to provide for. A wife, 2 kids. He needs it." Jessica's grip on her pen tightened. She had spent years in this industry, fighting to be taken seriously, outshining her colleagues, outperforming them. And yet, at the end of the day, the deciding factor wasn't her talent. It was her gender. Richard stood, signaling the conversation was over. "We're done here, Jessica." Jessica stayed seated, her knuckles white around the edge of the table. Her entire career, she had been told to wait, to work harder, to prove herself over and over. And for what? To be dismissed with a casual "be grateful"? No. Not this time. She pushed her chair back, standing slowly. The fire in her chest had turned into something colder. Sharper. "You're right, Richard," she said, her voice eerily calm. "We're done here." And for the first time in years, she meant it. Jessica walked out of the conference room, her heels clicking against the marble floor of Sterling and Whitman's headquarters. Each step felt heavier than the last, but her mind was crystal clear. She had spent 8 years at this company, pouring every ounce of her creativity and strategy into making it thrive. She had brought in millions in revenue, built campaigns that had set industry standards, and still, it wasn't enough. Richard Whitman's words played over in her mind, his smug smirk seared into her memory. Women should be grateful for what they have. Grateful? For what? For being undervalued? Overlooked? Expected to work twice as hard for half the recognition? Her hands curled into fists as she stepped into her office. She glanced around, framed awards on the wall, stacks of pitch decks and marketing reports she had spent countless nights perfecting. Every single success of this company had her fingerprints on it. And yet, she was disposable to them. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she hadn't called in a long time. Linda? There was a brief pause, then the warm yet knowing voice of her old mentor. Jessica. I was wondering when you'd call. Linda had been a high-ranking executive at Sterling and Whitman years ago, until she, too, had been pushed out. They had called it a restructuring, but everyone knew what it was. Jessica exhaled. I think I'm done. A chuckle on the other end. Took you long enough. So, what's next? Jessica stared out the window, the city skyline stretching endlessly before her. What was next? For years, she had hustled, fought, climbed. She had done everything right. And yet, here she was, still asking permission for a seat at a table that was never meant for her. Something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to beg for what she deserved. She was going to build something better. By the end of the day, her resignation letter was on Richard Whitman's desk. The email was short, professional, and cuttingly direct. Effective immediately. I refuse to waste my talent where it isn't valued. She didn't wait for a reply. As she walked out of the office for the last time, she felt something she hadn't in years. Freedom. 3 months later. Jessica sat in a tiny, windowless co-working space in the back of a rented office suite. A laptop, a second-hand desk, and a dream, that's all she had. She had drained a chunk of her savings to launch Visionary Creative, a boutique marketing agency that would do everything Sterling and Whitman refused to do. No office politics. No glass ceilings. No boys' club. She reached out to every client, every contact, every connection she had made over the years. Most calls ended the same way. We love your work, Jessica, but we're locked into a contract with Sterling and Whitman. She knew it wouldn't be easy. She wasn't just competing against her former employer, she was trying to take them down. But she wasn't going to play by their rules. She had a plan. A bold, risky, borderline insane plan. She was going after their biggest clients. And she was going to make them an offer they couldn't refuse. Sterling and Whitman had underestimated her once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. Jessica tapped her fingers against the desk, her mind racing. Every big company had a weakness. She just had to find Sterling and Whitman's. She pulled up the client list she had memorized over the years. The agency had built its reputation on legacy accounts, old money, old contracts, and outdated ideas. But the industry was changing. Fast. She needed one major client to take a chance on her. And she knew exactly where to start. Green Tech Innovations. A billion-dollar sustainable energy company and one of Sterling and Whitman's top-paying accounts. They had always been difficult to please. Jessica had worked on their campaigns for years, smoothing over their frustrations when Sterling and Whitman delivered safe, outdated marketing strategies. Now, it was time to exploit that dissatisfaction. She took a breath and dialed the number. This is Daniel Cohen, a voice answered. Daniel Cohen, Green Tech's Chief Marketing Officer. Jessica leaned forward, her voice steady. Daniel, it's Jessica Morgan. I have a proposal that I think you're going to want to hear. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. Jessica. I heard you left Sterling and Whitman. I did. And I'm building something better. A pause. Then, a chuckle. Well, you've got my attention. Let's hear it. Jessica exhaled, steadying herself. This was it. The moment that would either make or break her. Give me 15 minutes. I'll show you how Visionary Creative can do what Sterling and Whitman never could. The next afternoon, Jessica stepped into Green Tech's boardroom, a far cry from the tiny office space she had been working from. But she had learned something crucial in all her years in marketing: people didn't buy products. They bought confidence. They bought a vision. And right now, she was about to sell them a revolution. The executives sat around the table, waiting. Jessica stood tall, controlled the room. She didn't waste time. She ripped into Sterling and Whitman's outdated approach, the recycled strategies, the lack of risk-taking, the way they relied on their reputation instead of delivering results. Then, she unveiled her plan. A data-driven, cutting-edge strategy that would position green tech as the leader in sustainable energy, not just in advertising, but in culture. She promised them real engagement, real growth, real innovation. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Then, Daniel Cohen leaned back in his chair and smiled. "You're right. Sterling and Whitman has been coasting for years. I want fresh ideas. I want results. And I think you're the one to deliver them." Jessica's heart pounded. "So, what are you saying?" He slid a document across the table. "I'm saying let's see what you can do. Sign the contract, Jessica. Green tech is yours." Her hands trembled as she picked up the pen. Her first major client. The first crack in Sterling and Whitman's empire. She signed. And with that, the war had begun. Jessica walked out of Green Tech's office, gripping the signed contract like it was her ticket to a new life. In many ways, it was. This was no small win, this was a direct hit to Sterling and Whitman. Green Tech wasn't just any client, they were one of the top 5 revenue drivers for the agency. Losing them would send shockwaves through the company. And she had just taken them. The moment she stepped into her car, she let out a slow breath, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. For months, she had been fighting just to get a seat at the table. Now, she was building her own. She wasted no time. The moment she got back to her office, the tiny rented space she could barely afford, she pulled her laptop open and drafted an announcement. Nothing flashy, nothing arrogant. Just facts. Excited to share that Visionary Creative is officially partnering with Green Tech Innovations to redefine the future of sustainable marketing. Thrilled for what's ahead. She hit post. Then, she waited. The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, her inbox exploded. Former colleagues at Sterling and Whitman sent texts laced with shock and curiosity. A few clients she had worked with in the past reached out with "let's catch up soon" messages, the kind that meant they were suddenly reconsidering their contracts. And then, the message she had been waiting for. Richard Whitman. It was short. "Jessica. Call me." She didn't. Instead, she smiled, leaned back in her chair, and watched as the first domino fell. Sterling and Whitman didn't realize it yet, but this was just the beginning. Jessica didn't respond to Richard's message. She had no interest in hearing whatever excuse or veiled threat he had prepared. Instead, she focused on what mattered, growing Visionary Creative into something unstoppable. The Green Tech deal was just the start. With their campaign underway, she now had leverage. Sterling and Whitman's competitors saw what had happened and took notice. Within weeks, 2 more clients, both mid-sized brands, reached out, eager to explore new strategies. They had been frustrated with Sterling and Whitman's lack of innovation, but until now, they hadn't seen a viable alternative. Jessica made sure Visionary Creative was that alternative. Her small team, just 3 former colleagues who had quit Sterling and Whitman to follow her, worked around the clock, pushing the limits of what digital marketing could do. They built interactive campaigns, embraced data-driven insights, and created messaging that actually resonated with audiences. It was fresh. It was different. And most importantly, it was working. Then, the first real crack in Sterling and Whitman's foundation appeared. A leaked memo. One of Jessica's contacts, still inside the company, forwarded it to her late one night. "Team, due to unforeseen client departures, we are undergoing a budget reassessment. Discretion is advised in all external communications. Maintain confidence in our long-term strategy." Translation? They were bleeding. Jessica leaned back in her chair, staring at the email. The company that had dismissed her, belittled her, refused to recognize her worth, was now scrambling. And she was just getting started. Jessica sat in the dimly lit office of Visionary Creative, staring at the financial report on her screen. The numbers weren't where they needed to be. Green Tech's contract had given her agency a lifeline, but growth was expensive. Rent, salaries, software, marketing, everything added up. She had put nearly all of her savings into this company. And now, reality was hitting her hard. The worst part? She wasn't sure how much longer she could keep this up. A sharp knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Linda. Her mentor walked in with the kind of quiet authority that had always commanded respect. Once, she had been one of the top executives at Sterling and Whitman. Now, she was retired, but she had seen enough battles to know when someone was drowning. "You need capital," Linda said simply, taking a seat. Jessica let out a bitter laugh. "No kidding." Linda folded her arms. "Have you considered investors?" Jessica hesitated. She had thought about it. But there was a problem. "Venture capitalists don't bet on women like me," she admitted. "They want young tech bros or Ivy League connections. I've got neither." Linda gave her a long look before pulling out a folded piece of paper and sliding it across the desk. "Then take it from the people who don't want you to win." Jessica opened the paper. It was a contact list, private investors, some of whom she recognized. Hedge fund managers. Corporate leaders. People who would fund a company like hers, if the price was right. She shook her head. "That's exactly the kind of money that would force me into compromises. I didn't build this company just to sell my soul." Linda sighed. "Then there's one other option." Jessica looked up. Linda's expression was unreadable. "Sue them." Jessica's stomach twisted. "You want me to sue Sterling and Whitman?" Linda leaned forward. "They discriminated against you. You have proof. If you file a lawsuit, not only do you get a settlement, but you expose their entire culture. That alone would push more of their clients into your hands." Jessica felt the weight of the choice settle over her. If she sued, it would be a war. It could destroy Sterling and Whitman. It could also destroy her. Her name would be everywhere. She would be labeled difficult, angry, too emotional. Investors would hesitate to touch her. But if she stayed silent, Sterling and Whitman would continue getting away with it. The room felt suffocating. The air, heavy with unspoken consequences. She had fought her entire career to be taken seriously. And now, she had to decide, did she want to win quietly, or did she want to burn everything down? She exhaled slowly, her fingers tightening around the paper. "Give me a day," she said finally. "Then I'll let you know how I want to play this." Linda nodded. "Just remember, Jessica, power is never given. It's taken." And with that, she walked out, leaving Jessica alone with the biggest decision of her life. They denied her a raise, now she owns the company. Jessica didn't sleep that night. She sat in her tiny office, staring at the city skyline beyond the window, weighing her options. Sue Sterling and Whitman, or stay quiet and build visionary creative on her own terms? Both paths carried risks. A lawsuit would expose the truth, force change, and possibly give her the financial leverage she needed. But it would also make her a target. Richard Whitman wouldn't go down without a fight. On the other hand, focusing solely on her business meant walking away from justice. It meant letting them get away with what they had done to her, and likely to countless other women before her. She needed more time. More clarity. At dawn, she made a decision. She needed to talk to someone who had been in this fight before. 2 hours later, a coffee shop in Midtown. Linda was already waiting when Jessica arrived. The older woman had 2 cups of coffee on the table, one black, one with a splash of cream, Jessica's usual. "So," Linda said, leaning back in her chair. "You've made up your mind?" Jessica sighed, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic mug. "Not yet," she admitted. "I know what I want to do. I just don't know if it's the smart thing to do." Linda studied her for a long moment. "And what do you want to do?" Jessica hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been burning inside her all night. "I want to burn them to the ground." Linda let out a slow breath. Good. That means you're ready. Jessica frowned. For what? Linda reached into her bag and pulled out a thick folder, sliding it across the table. For this. Jessica opened it and felt her pulse spike. Inside were documents, emails, HR complaints, evidence. Proof that Sterling and Whitman had been discriminating against women for years. Jessica looked up, stunned. Where did you get this? Linda smirked. Let's just say I wasn't the only woman they tried to silence. Jessica flipped through the pages. Former employees, women she had worked with, names she recognized. Some had been pushed out quietly. Others had been fired for not being a culture fit. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was a pattern. A systemic issue. She clenched her jaw, feeling the weight of what this meant. If she moved forward, this wouldn't be a simple lawsuit. It would be a takedown. And for the first time since she had walked out of that conference room months ago, she knew exactly what she had to do. Jessica closed the folder, meeting Linda's eyes. Let's do this. And just like that, the war officially began. Jessica sat in the sleek, modern office of her lawyer, Angela Patel, a powerhouse attorney who had built a reputation taking down corporate giants. The folder Linda had given her was spread across the conference table. Angela flipped through the pages, her eyes sharp, calculating. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but firm. You have a case. A strong one. Jessica exhaled, feeling a mix of relief and tension. So what happens next? Angela closed the folder. We file. But you need to be ready for what's coming. Jessica nodded. I know Sterling and Whitman won't go down without a fight. Angela gave a dry chuckle. A fight would be an understatement. They will try to bury you. Expect smear campaigns, counter lawsuits, and, if they get desperate, attempts to buy your silence. Jessica's stomach turned. She had seen this playbook before. The corporate machine didn't just defend itself, it crushed people. But she had come too far to back down now. Let them try, she said. I'm ready. 1 week later, the lawsuit goes public. When Jessica Morgan vs. Sterling and Whitman Advertising hit the press, the response was immediate. Headlines exploded. Small Blue Diamond ex-executive sues Sterling and Whitman for gender discrimination. Small Blue Diamond marketing powerhouse faces allegations of systemic bias against women. Small Blue Diamond Jessica Morgan, founder of Visionary Creative, takes on former employer in landmark case. Social media erupted. Women in the industry shared their own experiences. Former Sterling and Whitman employees reached out, whispering their support. Some wanted to join the lawsuit. But not everyone was on Jessica's side. Within 24 hours, Richard Whitman struck back. The morning after the lawsuit went public, Jessica's phone buzzed nonstop. Her reputation was under fire. Red Triangle pointed down anonymous sources leaked performance reviews suggesting she had been difficult to work with and not a team player. Red Triangle pointed down a PR firm hired by Sterling and Whitman planted stories questioning her leadership at Visionary Creative. Red Triangle pointed down a major client pulled out from working with her agency, afraid of being caught in the crossfire. Then came the final blow. Sterling and Whitman countersued. The lawsuit accused Jessica of stealing proprietary client data, a baseless claim, but one that could drag the case through the courts for years. Jessica stared at the headline, her heart pounding. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was war. That night, Jessica sat alone in her office, exhaustion pressing down on her. She had lost sleep. Lost a client. And for the first time, she wondered if she had made a mistake. The door opened. Linda walked in, a bottle of whiskey in one hand, 2 glasses in the other. Without a word, she poured them both a drink. Jessica took a sip, the burn grounding her. Tell me the truth, she said. Do you think I can actually win this? Linda didn't answer right away. She leaned forward, her gaze steady. Winning isn't just about the lawsuit, Jessica. It's about proving you won't be silenced. Even if they fight dirty. Jessica swallowed hard. She hadn't come this far to give up. She wasn't backing down. She was about to fight harder than she ever had before. And when the dust settled, either Sterling and Whitman would fall, or she would. Jessica didn't sleep that night. The lawsuit had turned into a full-scale war, and she knew she was running out of time. Sterling and Whitman had more money, more lawyers, and more influence. If she played this wrong, they would bury her. She needed a move that Richard Whitman wouldn't see coming. And then, just before dawn, it hit her. They had underestimated her one last time. The next morning, Jessica met with Angela Patel, her attorney, and slid a file across the desk. Angela flipped through it, her eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Where did you get this?" she asked, impressed. Jessica smirked. "I built my career on knowing people." Inside the file was a whistleblower statement from a former Sterling and Whitman executive, one who had been silenced years ago. The document detailed years of fraudulent billing, overcharging clients, and inflating ad performance metrics. "If this gets out," Angela murmured, scanning the documents, "Sterling and Whitman won't just lose the lawsuit. They'll lose everything." Jessica leaned forward. "Then let's make sure it gets out." The next day, an anonymous exposé appeared on major business news sites. Sterling and Whitman had been deceiving their biggest clients for years. Small Blue Diamond, they had charged millions in extra fees with no justification. Small Blue Diamond, they had falsified marketing data to make themselves look more effective. Small Blue Diamond, they had covered up internal complaints of gender discrimination and misconduct. By noon, clients started pulling out. By evening, Sterling and Whitman's stock was plummeting. And by the next morning, Richard Whitman was in full panic mode. Jessica knew he would call. When her phone rang, she let it go to voicemail. Twice. On the third call, she answered. "Jessica," Richard's voice was strained. "Let's talk." She let the silence stretch, making him sweat. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Finally, she spoke. "Talk? I thought we were done here." Richard exhaled sharply. "We both know this has gone too far. Name your price." Jessica smiled. "You don't get to buy your way out of this, Richard." A long pause. Then, for the first time, his voice lost its arrogance. "What do you want?" Jessica leaned back in her chair, savoring the moment. "I want Sterling and Whitman." The next morning, the deal was finalized. Small Blue Diamond Jessica would acquire Sterling and Whitman at a fraction of its value. Small Blue Diamond Richard Whitman would step down as CEO, effective immediately. Small Blue Diamond Visionary Creative would merge, but under her leadership. The once great agency had fallen. And Jessica owned it now. Jessica stood in the executive boardroom of Sterling and Whitman, now rebranded as Visionary Creative HQ. She looked around the room where, months ago, Richard Whitman had dismissed her. Now, his name had been wiped from the company walls. She stepped to the window, watching the city skyline stretch before her. Linda walked in, holding a glass of champagne. "How does it feel?" Jessica smiled, lifting her own glass. "Like I should have asked for more." They clinked glasses, and Jessica turned back to the view. She had fought. She had won. And now, she was the boss. Jessica's story is more than just a tale of revenge, it's a powerful reminder that no one should be forced to accept less than they deserve. Too often, women in the workplace are undervalued, dismissed, or told to be grateful instead of being rewarded for their achievements. But Jessica refused to play by their rules. She didn't wait for permission, she built her own empire. Her journey teaches us that success isn't given, it's taken. And sometimes, the best revenge is proving them wrong. But now, we want to hear from you. Speech Balloon, what do you think about Jessica's decision? Do you believe she handled it the right way, or would you have done something different? Comment 2 if you loved the story and 7 if you think it could have ended differently. We can't wait to read your thoughts. And if you enjoy powerful, real-life inspired stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to True Tales. Natalie brings you new, thought-provoking stories every day. Don't miss the next one. See you in the comments.